I think it's 1 p.m. now, right? And Cyril is prepared.
1 p.m. Yes, in Sweden. 1
Yeah.
p.m.
And in Ukraine, it's 1 p.m. also, no?
Oh,
in Ukraine, it's 2 p.m., but I'm not in Ukraine.
You're in Africa, right?
I'm in Africa, yeah.
Namibia, yeah.
And we have the same time with Stockholm here.
Oh,
that's not the same temperature necessarily, but the same time.
Yeah. Anyway, welcome everyone to this lecture, which is the second part of the trilogy of political theology, public theology, and public ecclesiology. Cyril Hovorun has been contributing to building a society from an ecclesial perspective. Recently, way back, he was working with making the church relevant for the Ukrainian society as the head of external relations in the Moscow Patriarchate for the Ukrainian Orthodox Church. And today he's working from a scholarly seat, doing the same thing, figuring out how the church becomes relevant through the discourse around the society. And the theme for today is public theology. And I think I will let Cyril introduce this theme on his own. I don't think I would like to add something because the addition is the theme for today. So I leave the floor for our Namibian guy now. It's Namibia, right? You're in Namibia, right?
Yes, exactly. Yeah, that's right.
So please, Professor Hovorun.
Thank you, Michael. Thank you, Michael, for your introduction, and thank you for joining this lecture. In this COVID era, we can actually lecture from any spot on earth and reach wide audiences. This is the benefit of our strange times. Indeed, I'm going to speak about public theology, but I would a bit narrow it to public ecclesiology. Last time, I had a chance to speak about critical ecclesiology, and public ecclesiology. It's kind of it's relevant to the critical ecclesiology. And if you want, my today's lecture is going to continue what I said last time about critical ecclesiology. And as you probably know, ecclesiology is really a focus of St. Ignatius studies. Michael is very much in those studies, and we try to approach to explore the topic of ecclesiology from different perspectives, from the perspective of critical studies, of social sciences, political sciences. We really believe that the phenomenon of the church is a key to understand the modern theological problems, to understand the place of the church in the modern societies, including the secular environment. And we firmly believe that, ecclesiology continues to play a key role in the Eastern Christian studies. As you probably know, the 20th century was declared to be the century of ecclesiology. And it was declared first like that in the West. And then the Eastern theologians picked up this idea and also said that, well, the 20th century is going to be was that century of ecclesiology. But the 20th century ended, but ecclesiology has not ended. It continues to play, I believe, a key role. And maybe in contrast to other beliefs expressed earlier, I would say that the 21st century is going to be the same century of ecclesiology as the 20th century used to be. So it really continues like that. And in St. Ignatius, we try to contribute to the ecclesiological studies in various ways. So today I'm going to focus on the public aspect of ecclesiology of the church in the public square, as it were. This famous image of the church as a player, a figure in the public square, let us modify it to and to tailor it to the Eastern Christian studies. I would present the church in the public square as ecclesia in agora. I really like this image of agora the Greek, a part of the Greek polis. I would say the core, the central part of the Greek polis, together with Acropolis, of course. The Greek city had two major parts. Acropolis, which was divine, which was above the rest of the, of the city, of the polis, where God lives. Gods lived at the time. Well, people believe so, and where the most important sanctuaries were built. On Acropolis, people usually didn't live on Acropolis, but they lived downstairs, underneath the Acropolis. They lived in the dwellings, and those dwellings were not like modern apartment houses. They were very modest, and they were more like huts, like those African huts that I experienced here in Africa. People really, the place where they stay is very modest. It's just, to stay overnight, nothing fancy, nothing luxurious about that. The same was the way how the Greeks lived. They lived like modern Africans. They lived in huts, not really funny accommodations, but they spent all their lives in agora, in the place where they exchanged goods, resources, ideas, philosophies. They developed philosophies in agora. They learned news. They discussed things. They argued for their points. So the entire intellectual, economic, social, everything else life of a Greek polis was conducted in agora. So the agora was somehow in the shadow of Acropolis, and also an intrinsic part of the Greek polis. If you've been to Athens, to the Athenian kind of Acropolis, you probably know that nowadays you can go to the Acropolis in two ways: either through the street of Dionysius the Areopagite, which leads you straight to the Acropolis, and you bypass, the museum, the modern museum of Acropolis, or you can go actually ascend from agora. So one is kind of a pompous way, a very official way to go to Acropolis, and another one is less official but more kind of interesting way to go through agora. But you need to go up. It's a bit kind of it takes a bit of effort to get up there. And I assume that Apostle Paul, when he went to Areopagus to address his famous speech recorded in the book of Acts to the officials in Areopagus, he ascended the Areopagus through agora. I'm pretty sure that he passed by agora, and he probably, had a chance to engage in conversations with people whom he met in the agora. Maybe buyers, sellers, maybe some, nomadic philosophers, thinkers of different schools. He had probably conversations with different kinds of people on his way to Areopagus to deliver his famous speech. And I believe that this figure of Apostle Paul, passing through the agora in Athens, is somehow an image of the church, which finds itself in the public space, in the space where there are many ideas, many trends, and the church in this public space exchanges, ideas and conversations, smoke and long talks with all sorts of people. This is what places the church in the public square. That's why I believe that the idea of the church in the public square, even though it was articulated in the 20th century very well by people like Stakehouse, for instance, in the United States, who actually, coined the phrase, the church in the public space. But in the Eastern Christianity, we know this idea from the very beginning, from the times of Apostle Paul, ascending, Areopagus and passing through the agora on his way to Areopagus. So it's really intrinsic to the Eastern Christianity and belief to the global Christianity for the church to be in the public space, to be in the agora, to be a part of this conversation, the continuous conversation which unfolds in the agora. And in the agora, the church, just like Apostle Paul, does not encounter only individuals, individual buyers or sellers or philosophers. The church encounters in agora groups of people, social groups. And this is a very important point that I want to make in my presentation, that the church, while in agora, in the public space, does not speak, talk to, or listen to only to individuals, but also to social groups, political groups, well, all sorts of groups that individuals form. This was certainly the case in the Athenian agora with Apostle Paul, because in the ancient Greek perception, agora was not just a sum of individuals. It was a place where indeed different social groups were represented. And it's interesting that in some kind of definitions of agora, we can hear this social or political dimension of the agora. For instance, in Crete, they called the agora of politicians, of citizens. They called this agora of citizens politia. It's another important and key word, I would say, in the Eastern Christian public theology or ecclesiology, politia, as it is a very important word in the ancient political science, because politia indeed, in the Raelian pronunciation it is politia, in the Erasmian it would be politeia, whatever you prefer. So I personally prefer the Raelian pronunciation, so I will use this word politia. So this is a kind of a key word in the ancient political science and philosophy, as well as in the ecclesiology, after all. Politia has many meanings, and one of the meanings of this word is republic. That is a function, a social function and political function of groups who send their representatives to meet and to discuss the matters of the society, pertinent to the society. Polity, in this sense, in the ancient world, was somehow different from monarchy, from a pyramidally structured, strictly hierarchical structured society. It was more about the horizontal relations between the citizens, between the members of politia. And in the Greek language, a citizen is politis, a member of politia. So it's really, politia is a gathering of the citizens, aware of their duty, citizenship, their rights and duties, and those exactly citizens, polites, the church does meet in agora. So in the agora, the church encounters citizens representing different groups and different interests, interacting with those groups. I just mentioned the image of Apostle Paul entering the Areopagus through the Athenian agora. Let me mention another image, which also stands for the same thing. Jesus Christ entering Jerusalem, the feast that we will celebrate very soon, in 1 week approximately, in the Eastern Christianity. I believe that it was an act very similar to the one of Paul, because Jesus was entering essentially, what for the Jews was the agora, Jerusalem. It was both Acropolis and agora together, the same kind of thing, packed, or two things packed into one thing. Because, the Temple of Jerusalem, after all, it was both the temple as such and the place where people interacted with one another. Sometimes, yes, there were economic exchanges which Jesus disapproved, as we know, and he expelled the traders from the temple. But it exactly means that the temple in Jerusalem, the holiest place for Jews, was also a place of exchange. It was also an agora in a sense. So Jesus enters this place, which was a public place for the Jews and also for the Gentiles. As we know, the Gentiles were also allowed to enter some premises on their way to the temple. And Jesus enters all those spaces, different spaces, the space of Gentiles, the space of women, the space which was reserved only for males, and he encounters all those spaces, just like the church. His continuation, the continuation of his incarnation, encounters different public spaces. So for me, if you want, the feast of the Palm Sunday, the entrance of Jesus to Jerusalem, it's like a patron feast for public ecclesiology. So if we want one day to celebrate public ecclesiology in our church calendar, we need to pick up, the Palm Sunday, the entrance of our Lord to Jerusalem, as our feast day for that. This idea of Jesus entering the public space has also an important Christological implication, if you want. We speak in the Eastern Christianity about the double consubstantiality of Jesus, that Jesus Christ as the Son of God is consubstantial with the Father according to his divine nature, essence. He is also consubstantial with us as a human being. So he has this double consubstantiality. The Greek word homousios means consubstantiality. I would say that the church has the same kind of double consubstantiality. The church is consubstantial with God according to the church's kind of divine dimension. And this dimension is very strong in the church, certainly. And the church is consubstantial with us, but not as individuals, I would say, but as societies, as social groups. Therefore, the church is consubstantial with politeia. It is together with being consubstantial with God. So that's how politeia is somehow included into the church through the incarnation and owing to the incarnation. That's why it is not just a coincidence that the church encounters politeia in its public life. No, the politeia is a very substantial part of the being of the church, just like humanity as such, is a very important and intrinsic part of the being of the church, and it is a substantial and intrinsic part of Jesus's existence. Therefore, the church has features this double consubstantiality, and through this consubstantiality with politeia, with the human societies, with the human social groups, it actually justifies those groups, gives meaning to those groups, to the human grouping according to political or social or any other criteria and interests. I would also call the church a hypostasis, a public hypostasis, to use another Christological term, because the church amalgamates, the church somehow summarizes and consolidates various interests of people who belong to the church in the way that is fitting the divine aspect of the church, the purpose, the divine purpose of the church, of people being destined to be saved in the church. So the church is a hypostasis, a public hypostasis of the divine presence among the people. One of the theories about the hypostasis, which became popular in the 4th century, was very well expressed by Gregory of Nyssa, and goes back to some Neoplatonists like Porphyry, for instance. Hypostasis is a summary, is an amalgamation of different properties of a personality, for instance. In this sense, the public hypostasis of the church is also an amalgamation of various aspects of social and political life, if you want, of the church in the public square. So the church, by interacting with the public square, with this agora, also takes upon it, absorbs some qualities of the public square. The church inevitably adopts the language of this public square. Imagine again Paul or any sage, say, because not just Paul, but sages kind of entered the agora, and they try to engage into a conversation. In order to have this conversation meaningful, that sage or Paul had to speak the language of those people whom he met in the agora, the same dialects, as it were, the same notions, the same ideas. He had to be, aware about those ideas. And therefore, for the church, it is important to understand and to speak the language of the public space where the church enters, where the church exists and functions. Also, the presence of the church in agora is not just about delivering a message, but also listening to the messages, because sometimes the vox of populi, of that populace which inhabits the agora, can be the vox of God, vox Dei, vox populi, vox Dei, that famous Latin proverb that states that sometimes the voice of people can be the voice of God, and probably the best place where the voice of people can be heard, this is agora. And that's the place where the church can listen to the voice of God coming from the people and maybe learn something, at least in its human kind of dimension. So the agora is a place where the church receives its hypostatic qualities, as it were, and also where the church engages in a dialogue through which the church is able to deliver messages to the people in the agora, and also to listen to the messages coming from the people, again, in the public space, in the agora. At the same time, I think it is important to discern the presence of the person of the people in the agora and of the church in the agora. In which sense? It is important to distinguish between the church entering the agora, speaking in the agora, engaging with the people and different entities in the agora, but not mixing up with them. As you know, agora is, and as any marketplace, is a very noisy place. A lot of noises are there, and you can hardly speak when, on the market day, when a lot of people come together. And the voice of the church can be easily lost in the agora if the church just repeats what other people or entities speak about in the agora. That's why the church's voice should be really prophetic, should be really special, should really stand out of those noises of the marketplace. The church should remain the church, not just another trader, not just another seller on the agora, not another marketing agent or whatever. The church needs to remain the church. Also, what is helpful, I believe, in speaking about the church in the agora is another thing, is whether the church, whether Christianity is really a public religion. this is a big conversation which has started, in the period of reflections upon secularism, secularization. Secularization is a kind of modern phenomenon, and people have discussed it since a long time ago. And the secularist theories say that the religion should be removed from the public space. Religion should become a personal thing, as it used to be. So religion can survive only in the personal space, not in the public spaces. That is the point, the kind of the major point of the mainstream secularism, the ideology of secularization, if you want. And in contrast to this voice of secularists, some intellectuals say that no, the church has to become public. Excuse me. The church has to become a public. The church has to have its voice heard publicly, and the church essentially has to be a public religion. I think this is a kind of difficult conversation. It is a bit controversial. I personally believe that the church is not obliged to be a public religion. The church emerged not as a public religion. I mean, Christianity emerged not as a public religion, but something different. The church emerged as a private religion originally. And the church emerged as a private religion at the time when the public religion was, polytheism. The Gentile religion was actually filled the public spaces. And I would say that the public, the Gentile religion, the Greco-Roman religion, the Greco-Roman religion was essentially public of the society, of the legitimacy to political authorities, to contribute to the sacrality or to provide the sacral framework, as it were, for different public and social actions, essentially to serve the needs of the public, as it were. The voice of the Greco-Roman religion was not prophetic, I would say. Yes, there were prophetic voices in places like Daphne with the oracles, but it's interesting that the oracles were not located in the public spaces. They were located in deserted places, far away from where people lived. All the oracles of the ancient world were in the remote places, but the Greco-Roman religion in its mass which was present in the public space, was not prophetic. It was serving survival. It was serving, the needs of the different social groups, and it was essentially a sacred framework for very secular, I would say, political and social interests. That was its role. Moreover, the Greco-Roman religion was primarily public, because all the rites were performed, in the streets, in the public, and the temples were very much public spaces in the cities. So that was the nature of the Greco-Roman religion, to be public, and Christianity emerged in contrast to this public, nature of the dominant religion of the time. Christianity emerged exactly as a very private thing. It was a group of the disciples who met in very private places, like the upper room in Zion, or wherever Jesus, brought them and where they met. During the first 3 centuries, Christian communities met in private places. Again, we have this wonderful example of such a private place in what is now Syria, in the place called Dura Europos. It was kind of abandoned in the 3rd century and was destroyed by the Parthian invaders. They just, covered this city with sand, which preserved the city. And now we have an example of a Greco-Roman city of the 3rd century. And we have also an example of a community there. There was a Christian community there, which was located in and the community gathered in a private house. It was a private space. It was not at all a public space. The public space in Dura Europos, in that city, was still filled with the Greco-Roman religion. And in the central part of this Dura Europos thing was occupied by, the Greco-Roman temples with all the attributes of ritual, Greco-Roman ritual. So as late as in the 3rd century, in a normal Greco-Roman city like Dura Europos, the public space was still occupied by pagan religion, and Christianity was still a very private thing. Only with the conversion of Christianity of the empire to Christianity after Constantine, Christianity gradually replaced the Greco-Roman religion as a public religion. It became a public religion, and the token of this transformation, probably the most obvious and the most illustrating token of this transformation are the basilicas. The most common type of church architecture that we know, basilicas. It was not originally a religious edifice. It was an architectural style developed for public spaces. Basilicas were the places where all the imperial or state administrative offices were gathered, where all the representative bodies, political and social bodies were gathered together. If you go, there are some such places like stores in the Athenian agora, which were built in the Roman times, where you can see kind of places like basilicas and very similar to basilica, and which were filled by the Greco-Roman public spaces. So the church gradually filled those spaces, and Christianity became a public religion thus. Sometimes Christianity, after becoming a public religion, substituted the Greco-Roman religion in many functions, like in the function of legitimizing, of providing legitimacy for the political political authorities. That's how we have this phenomenon of the church supporting different political regimes, because that was the job of the Greco-Roman religion in the past, to provide legitimacy, for the existent political regime, whatever this regime was, without offering a prophetic voice about this regime. We know that there were protests against tyrants in the ancient Greece or ancient Rome, not from the priests of the Greco-Roman religion, but coming from the essentially philosophers and poets, from some people whom we would call now secular figures, but not from the religious figures. The religious figures fulfill their public duties without offering the prophetic voice. And that's what Christianity gradually, in some cases, turned to be like, to be a servant for a provider of secular framework for very kind of political or social agendas without offering a prophetic voice. At the same time, the task, the function of the church is exactly to provide such a prophetic voice, to be Apostle Paul in the Athenian agora, not just any voiceless and nameless priest of a dominant religion, offering some blessings and sacrality to anyone who asks for this blessing. I mean, a person in power. So that is the kind of a nuance that I'd like to underline in my presentation of the church standing in the public square. The church standing in the public square is not like the Greco-Roman religion framing this public square in the voiceless way, in the non-prophetic way, in the way to offer sacrifices and to bless things, whatever they ask this religion to do, but to do it in a meaningful way and to do it in a prophetic way. That is kind of the thing that we need to keep in mind when we talk about the church in agora, the church in the public religion. So I think I would stop here at this point, and we could have now a discussion.
So I invite everyone to use the chat for placing questions to Cyril. Yes, to give you the chance now to. Seraphim is raising his hand, so maybe you would like to say something.
Yes, I'm sorry, I'm on my mobile phone, so it's a bit awkward to write.
Okay.
I was just wondering, do you distinguish between, when you say private, do you distinguish just between the spaces, or do you also make a distinction there in whether or not Christianity emerged as a personal religion or as a corporate religion? Because even if people were meeting in private, it was still something akin to the Jewish minyan, the meeting, the gathering together.
Yeah.
Do you have any comments on that?
Yeah, well, private doesn't mean individual. Private can be communal, and Christianity emerged as a communal religion, not individual. That is an important distinction.
Because the reason I ask is because I've been thinking a lot about exactly that critique which you brought up, or this idea that religion, it might be all very well and serve a purpose, but it should be a private affair. And then I often think that when it's framed in that way, what they're also saying is it should be an individual affair. I don't know if you have any comments on that.
Yeah. That's what I mean. That private does not necessarily mean individual, and public does not necessarily mean communal. So Christianity is both communal, and originally it was private, non-public. And sometimes what happened to Christianity is that Christianity became public, but lost its communal dimension. It became like indeed a framework of a sacred framework for political or other social needs, without really addressing a community, or without having community as the main kind of subject or hypostasis of the church. And probably this communal dimension can better explain the difference between Christianity being a public religion and Christianity being a kind of more private thing. Original communities were very much private, but they were still communal events, not individuals. And Christianity can become public and at the same time lose its communal dimension and serving very individualistic ends, as it were, either political. If you take, for instance, I don't know, modern Russia, and the political interests are very personalized there. They serve the personal needs of one person, the president of the Russian Federation, and the church, filling completely the public space, serves the personal interests of that particular individual.
So next question we have is from Torbjörn Toll. So how do we balance private / public features of a church, as the church used many public terms such as liturgy, ecclesia, etc., and yet appearing more like one community among others in the public sphere?
Yeah, that's a very good question, because indeed the vocabulary of the church has been borrowed from the Greek political culture, including the word church itself. Ecclesia, it's a political term in the ancient Greek political philosophy. It meant a political body of the representatives of the polis, of the society. Not the entire polis was represented in Ecclesia, but it's not important for our conversation. What is important is that the Ecclesia was a political body, including the body that also decided the things, including religious matters. It's interesting that the political body of Ecclesia also discussed and decided upon religious matters, like when to have a festival to gods, or how to perform a particular ritual, or how to inaugurate a new temple on Acropolis. All those things were discussed by Ecclesia, but Ecclesia discussed also other things. Ecclesia also discussed, how to start and end the war, how to manage public finances. So it was really a kind of comprehensive body that discussed the entire variety, the entire array of things pertinent to polis, including religious things. And it was primarily political entity. And it's interesting that the disciples of Jesus decided to adopt this term for themselves. It's really difficult to figure out why they decided to adopt this very controversial term, because it was pagan, essentially. It was coming from a completely alien culture, Greek pagan culture, and yet they decided to adopt this term. Yeah, well, of course, the translators of Septuagint use this word to translate Kahal Yahweh, Ecclesia Theou, Ecclesia of God. And this was a kind of a literal translation of the Jewish word kahal. But still, there were many other underpinnings why the Christian community adopted this political term. The same is with liturgia. Liturgia was nothing but sponsorship, public sponsorship. Liturgia had to do with the Roman and somehow Greek system of patronage, when there were wealthy patrons who sponsored some public works, like, for instance, to build a new bath in a Roman city. And when a patron sponsored a bath, that was called liturgia. That was a kind of sponsorship that a person offered. That was another completely secular and political thing, if you want. And still, the Christians adopted this term from the Greco-Roman political culture. I believe that it has to do with what I said in my lecture earlier. That is the church that finds itself in agora adopts the language of the agora, the language that people speak in the agora, and those are the keywords, if you want: ecclesia, liturgia. All those are keywords spoken widely in the agora, and the church just adopted those terms in order to express itself and to explain itself to the people in the agora. So that is exactly the result of the conversation of the church with the people in the agora. And I want to add something that I forgot to say in my lecture. That is that the church can use the agora really as a mirror in which the church can distinguish its distinct features. The church needs agora. It's not just optional, a nice addition to the mission of the church. It's a very important, a crucial instrument for the church to realize itself, to develop its distinct self-awareness. Without a conversation in the agora, without engaging with the agora, the church is hardly possible to develop a meaningful self-perception. That's why, for instance, we have several references, quite a few references to the church in the pre-Constantinian era, including such masterpieces as the Pastor of Hermas, the famous kind of prophetic apocalyptic treatise, where the church plays a key role as a figure of a lady. That is a strong ecclesiological treatise which appeared before Constantine. And then after Constantine, we have very few references to the church. The church almost disappears from the theological discourses after Constantine. It's because the church became a sort of public religion, merged with the state, and became one thing with the state. without having the same kind of meaningful conversation with the agora that Paul had on his way to Areopagus. And then the church again emerges in the theological discourses in the era of secularization, when a secular space was created, emerged. As a result of the separation of the church from the state, the secular space emerged. And in this space, the church started seeing itself much better than when the church was a part of the state mechanism. This space created, this mirror in which the church started seeing and contemplating itself. And that's how ecclesiology, modern ecclesiology emerged. Or modern ecclesiology, especially in the East, emerged exactly as a result of this process of secularization in the works of such people like Khomyakov in Russia, who actually reflected on the processes of secularization in Imperial Russia and created ecclesiology as we know it now, the Orthodox ecclesiology. It emerged exactly through the newly found conversation of the church with the public space, with agora, as it were, in the Orthodox theology. So agora is important, is inevitable, is something crucially important for the self-reflection of the church.
The next question comes from Greece. Crystalia Lazzara says, greetings, I would only like to comment on the agora of the Athenians that comes in great contrast with today's Greek people perspective, who have a hard time providing space for dialogue with someone with a different perspective or background, both religious and social, even political. Question. What is your opinion, Professor Hovorun, on today's Greek reality in terms of religion?
Right, it's a good question. Thank you for it. Yes, well, as you know, in Greece, the church is still a part of the state. It's not separated from the state, formally at least, even though there is a widening and a kind of an expanding secular space in Greece. Well, many people in the church, in the Greek church, are afraid of this this secular space, and they want, the symphony with the state to continue, which is, I think, unrealistic and not exactly helpful for the church. And I believe that the Greek church learns maybe faster than other churches to deal with the sacred space, to deal with the new emerging, agoras of different public opinions and political ideas. Yes, on the one hand, in Greece, there are people and hierarchs who are very much against, the separation with the state, which frightens them, and they try to, to show their muscles, when they want to promote some agendas, like remember those manifestations against the identification codes under late Archbishop Christodoulos. At the same time, the Church of Greece, I think, is the place where the Orthodox, faster than in other places, learn how to deal with the new political realities and learn to appreciate those realities, to engage in the dialogue with the, with the modern secular thinking. So it's really kind of, for me, Greece is a laboratory of, new ideas, new ecclesiological ideas, new ecclesiological thinking. There are some brilliant minds who really come up with brilliant ideas about the new role that the church may play in the modern public space, as well as it is a country where there's some old ideas still thrive and try, to keep up.
The next question is from Lebanon by Professor Trabulsi. Thank you for Cyril. Question: do you think that the Orthodox Church in general masters the language of its society's agora and thus knows how to communicate its messages? If she has well-developed ones concerning modernity, sciences, human rights, media, church reform, anti-corruption, etc.? Question mark.
Yeah. Yeah, I think so. Well, yes, the church certainly learns. I mentioned the case of the Greek church. I think it is the fastest learning church somehow of new realities, and it's quite productive. And by the way, the students do an amazing work, and I know that Maria, who asked the previous question, she's the head of the student society at the theological department in Thessaloniki, and I would praise, the input of the students, theologians, to this work. Well, other theologians do the same. I think it's a kind of it's a new wave of of appreciation the current realities, political realities. Like, take one thing, like the attitude to liberal democracy. Until relatively recently, it was not fashionable among the Orthodox theologians to say good words about liberal democracy. Many people, I would say maybe most people, felt alienated from it, maybe just tolerating it without really appreciating it. We had many excesses, like, for instance, if you take the famous controversy around Eleftherios Venizelos in Greece, who was anathematized by the Greek church because he was against the monarchy, because he was against the king, Constantine. And, well, some parts of the church, especially in Athens, in the south of Greece, supported the king, and only a small group, but still a substantial group of hierarchs, especially in the north in Thessaloniki, supported Venizelos. And that controversy exactly indicated how difficult it was for the Greek church to come at terms with liberal democracy, which Venizelos represented. So gradually, I would say, now the appreciation of liberal democracy is growing, and new books appear all the time. I just want to mention the work done by the Fordham Center, the Eastern Christian Studies Center at Fordham University, who publish the guys there, Terry Papanikolaou and George Dimokopoulos. They publish books that actually support the idea of liberal democracy. And in Greece, there are new publications on this matter. So it's kind of this kind of appreciation is growing, and people detach themselves more and more from the old patterns of monarchy, monarchical thinking, and adopt more the republican patterns of thinking. And this is, this is, I would say, is a tendency of our time, and this is, I believe, a good tendency.
So the next question comes from from little Ethiopia in Tysling here in Södertälje, from Kesis Haile Jesus. Thank you for the lecture. How can we say that the early church was more private while the apostles were preaching in the public arenas and baptized thousands of people at a time?
Well, not all apostles, I'm afraid. Most apostles, stayed in Judea and preached to the local Jewish communities. Only a few, like Paul, and probably Paul was the most active in this, really tried to reach out and, to go beyond the Jewish setting, the Jewish communities. That's why, well, to a great extent, the earliest, the most the most early Christian community was still very much oriented on the Jewish world and stayed within the Jewish community. And only some bold figures like Paul stepped out and reached out to the Gentile world. Therefore, early Christianity was as public as generally Judaism, and Judaism was not public at all. First of all, Judaism was not allowed to address the Greco-Roman public sphere. by laws, and there were restrictive regulations, Roman regulations against the Jewish presence in the public space, and the Jewish community was supposed to, to be self-sufficient and to live its own life without interfering with agora, literally. And I think early Christianity, to a great extent, followed this pattern. That's why I mentioned the example of Paul going to agora. It was really exceptional. Other apostles didn't do that. They didn't, go to the most kind of Greek public space that you could imagine at the time, Areopagus. Paul went there, and Paul preached there, and this was a very kind of new thing for the Eastern Christianity. That's why, that is kind of my point again, that early Christianity was not public originally, and it was it started as a private communal thing and gradually developed into a wider thing.
The next question is from Britain, or maybe from Sweden, but from a British interest. And that's, if you compare with Ireland, we have a similar process. Do you have any thoughts on the way the Irish Republic evolved from a near theocracy to an extreme anti-clerical society within a generation, and where might it go next?
Yes, it's also a good question. I have some experience of Irish life somehow in both North Ireland and the Republic of Ireland. And it's a very good question indeed. And it's interesting that I believe that in Ireland, the experience of the church, primarily the Catholic Church, which is the majority church for the Irish people, it was not really the experience of the state religion, because they, especially in the latest kind of centuries, the centuries of the British Empire, because the empire imposed its own religion, which was Anglicanism, upon Irish people. And for many people in Ireland, the Catholic Church was a kind of a means of resistance to imperialism. Of course, I oversimplify things, and the things are much more complicated, but it's just a scheme, and I think it's not without its meaning. So the Catholic Church was not the church of the establishment, but it was the church of the anti-establishment, as it were, against the imperial rule. And now with the republic that emerged several decades ago, well, the Republic of Ireland, and the church became free, this anti-imperial resistance lost its meaning, and probably this contributed to making the Catholic Church more irrelevant to the Irish people, because they don't need to resist anymore to the British Empire, and that's why many of them, they don't need the church. That is the indication of the danger when the church is used for political purposes, whether good or bad political purposes. I mean, the anti-British resistance of the Irish people found its support in the Catholic Church, and it was mutual. I mean, the Republic, well, the Irish fighters and the Catholic Church supported one another, and it was mutual. But then, when the Irish people achieved their goal, political goal, and the church became irrelevant, its support diminished in the Irish society, just because previously the church played too much important political role. The same is in Poland. The Catholic Church in Poland played a crucial role during the time of Solidarność, of this resistance movement of the workers. Now, when the Polish society received what it wanted, independence from the Soviet Union, the Soviet bloc collapsed, and the church for many fighters became irrelevant. And that's why, well, the figures of support to the Catholic Church in the modern Polish society are going down. So that is the kind of a by-side effect, effect of the church losing its earlier political role, which means that the church should never or the society should never consider the church only as a political tool, because after the political goals are reached or become irrelevant, the church becomes irrelevant as well.
So the next question then is from Maro Di Shoram, Bishop of Church of East. Cyril, you mentioned that the church emerged as a private religion. We know that prior to the Pentecost, the disciples were afraid, but the Pentecost they went public and not private. So does not the book of Acts show that the church was public and not private?
Well, again, it depends how we define private and public. The book of Acts talks us about some fragments, historical episodes, very episodic indeed, of the early Christian community. Those communities were primarily Jewish, but also they stepped out and engaged and involved some Gentile elements. But still, we deal with communities which do not go public, which do not address the Roman public. The first time that Christianity addresses the public square, the Greco-Roman public square, was through the works of the apologists, actually, of people like Justin, or people like Athenagoras, or Theophilus of Antioch, an important figure for the Syriac Christianity, of course. So for the first time, the apologists, they reach out to the Greek public kind of Greco-Roman public square, and we can say that this is the first attempt of the church to tap into the Greco-Roman public square. Not indeed, I believe, in the book of Acts, but mostly in the writings of the apologists.
And then we have a question from Johanna. Greetings from Central Asia. So the church first started to see itself, mirror itself in the agora of their days. Some of ideas or self-knowledge that they gained that time, we have inherited and are still using as a church self-understanding today. But what happened when the church have to start that process all over again, like in the country I'm in now? What principles can we learn from that first process and the first church dialogue with our agora? When we today find the church in a setting or context where its history is still in its very beginning.
Yeah, well, it's not bad to start it again, over and over again. I would say it's even more helpful, maybe. After all, we cannot start from the scratch, because we all have memories and we have knowledge about how the things existed in the past. But what we need to do is to adjust and to apply those experiences as knowledges to the modern situation. That's why the church should not repeat itself and cannot repeat itself. It's naive and it's unrealistic to expect the church to repeat the patterns of the past. All the time, the church needs to, well, and it does actually start again and again, the things again and again. If you take Sweden, for instance, the Swedish situation, it's all the same. The Swedish society is changing. It has become extremely secular, as we know. It's much more secular than it used to be 50 years ago. And the church needs to find its own way in a very secular and yet very tolerant society. And I think it's it's a good thing. It's a good task. And the church is completely prepared to achieve this goal, prepared by knowing its own past, knowing its environment, its habitat, new habitat, which is the Swedish society. So the combination of the knowledge of the past that we had in the East, in the Christian East, with knowing the realities of the present political environment may help the church to do this. And I believe it is, after all, it is the purpose of Son Ignatius, isn't it, to learn to understand how the church, the old institution, probably, well, especially the Eastern Christian churches, which are the oldest institutions, religious institutions, can function in completely new environments like the Swedish society. And well, this is a good task and we are absolutely capable of solving this issue.
So I will have a last question, and that concerns the risks. How would you see the risk when the church, so to say, can come out on the public square and adopts a majority culture? Wouldn't it be a risk when it's aligned itself with the power of society, for example, government regime, or even a regime that is not democratic, or so forth?
Yeah. Yes, there is a risk, certainly. Just imagine an Athenian agora after Pericles, in the time of tyranny, when the agora was dominated by a particular discourse, a narrative, as it were, and it was totalitarian narrative. And imagine the church joining that narrative and supporting, repeating that narrative. That is a dangerous thing, I believe. The church, I think, needs to encourage the polyphony in the agora, because only in this polyphony the church can, promote its own voice. When there is no polyphony, when there is a monotony in the public discourses in the agora, and this monotony is dictated by one kind of leading power, then the church cannot engage in a meaningful conversation. Well, it can repeat, it can be like, can repeat the messages of the dominant powers, but no one will listen to those messages, because people, well, don't trust that monopoly, and the church loses its trust also among the people. So I believe it's important for the church in the agora, and that's why I believe that the image of agora is helpful for our conversation. The church, it's important for the church to encourage the polyphony of an agora, of a marketplace. But it is also important for the church not to get lost in this polyphony, to have its own prophetic voice, to have its own say, to promote its own narrative in this public space, without necessarily forcing other narratives from this public space, even if the church doesn't like them. Still, they need to be there in order to compete, and in order to prove the arguments. The power of the argument needs to play the most important role, more important role than the power of weapons or any political coercion.
That we have one additional question before we end this session, and that is, out of the session about private public, in what way would you say this is something that churches today ought to reflect about?
Yeah. Well, I think it is an important distinction, and it is still unclear for many. As I said, the anti-secularist modern discourse of public religion, like, for instance, if you take the writings of Jose Casanova, this famous sociologist of religion, who is now in Washington, D.C. at Georgetown University. Well, we're good friends, and I admire his work. But I think he sometimes overstates when he says that, well, that religion needs to be public again in order to be complete. I don't think that the public character of religion. Allow me to use my, the image or the distinction from my book, the nature, the scaffolds of the church, about the nature and the structures of the church. I think to be public is not natural. It's not necessarily natural for Christianity. I mean, without being public, Christianity remains public. Christianity remains Christianity. So without being public, Christianity remains Christianity. The church remains church. The church, for the church to be the church, it does not need to be, the church does not need to be, occupy the public space. The public kind of side of Christianity, of the church, is like a structure. Again, it's like a mirror, which is very helpful for the church to look at itself. But it's not the church itself. And therefore, the church can survive without the public space. However, the church in the public space needs to behave in a way to respect the space as aligned to the church. The church should not consider this space as an extension of itself. That is a common mistake of the churches that support dictatorships. They say, well, now those dictators give us eventually a space to expand, to fill it up, and to dominate it. That was, for instance, if you take the situation in Greece under the black colonels, the dictatorships 1967 through 74, or early dictatorships, when the dictatorships gave the church all the possibilities, to send the church's message, to the masses. And the church naively received this as an opportunity to fill up the public space, and it collapsed. I mean, the church failed to address people because when dictatorships failed, the church was essentially kicked out of the space, and the church lost its public credentials. That's why, yeah, I think it's very important to distinguish between the public aspect of Christianity and its communal aspect, and to keep balances, not to mix up with the environment that the church preaches to. Otherwise, the church can really end up in pitfalls like the modern dictatorships in Greece or in Romania or in Russia.
With that question, we end today's session, and I ask Bojana to say something.
Thank you, Professor Hovorun, and thank you all for being with us today. I would like to announce our next lecture in our public lecture series, and that will be a public lecture on public ecclesiology given by Dr. Michael Hjelm next Thursday, so April 22nd at 1 p.m. And I would like to ask Michael if he would like to add something.
Yeah, since it's already next week, I will try to make a tentative suggestion how to distinguish between political theology, public theology, and public ecclesiology, and how various methods of research is displayed in relation to these three concepts. And then focus in the end of trying to understand how we can conduct research in relation to public ecclesiology. That's the theme for next week.
Thank you. And with this, I wish you a wonderful day and see you next Thursday.